Wait, your planet spins? High Chancellor Vrick's four violet eyes narrowed as he stared at Ethan Grady, his elongated, featureless face betraying something akin to irritation or indigestion. Hard to tell. Why would an intelligent species choose to live on a celestial body with such instability? Ethan leaned back in his chair, the shiny, too clean surface of the Xyloxian High Council chamber making him stick out like a smudge on glass. His khakis and well-worn button-up weren't exactly ambassadorial, but then again, this wasn't a job he'd applied for. He'd just been the guy brave or dumb enough to say yes. Well, we didn't exactly choose, Ethan said, scratching his scruffy chin. Earth is where we, evolved. Can't really ask the ape ancestors why they didn't hold out for beachfront property on a tidally locked planet. The council chamber fell into a profound silence. Vrick exchanged glances or something resembling glances with the other council members, their translucent jellyfish-like forms pulsating faintly under the chamber's stark, white light. They'd brought him here as Earth's first interstellar ambassador, not because he was some genius scientist or diplomatic powerhouse, but because he'd survived 3 different hurricanes, a tornado, and a blizzard all in the same year. To the Xyloxians, humans were a strange species worthy of study, allegedly capable of thriving in primitive conditions the council considered borderline impossible for complex life. But Ethan had quickly learned their idea of primitive included anything less stable than their own planet, a paradise with no tectonic activity, no axial tilt, and weather that could be described as mildly breezy on its worst day. So your planet spins, Vrick said again, his tone dripping with skepticism. And this, spinning creates what you call weather. Yup, Ethan replied, popping the P for emphasis. Wind, rain, snow, hurricanes, lightning storms, heat waves, you name it, Earth's got it. Real grab bag of fun. Another council member, Zarak, who had a slightly more curious air about him, leaned forward. His bioluminescent tendrils shifted shades of green and blue, which Ethan had learned was their version of interest. And yet your species persists? You survive these conditions regularly. Survive, Ethan said with a lopsided grin. We don't just survive, we thrive. Sure, the weather can get a little aggressive sometimes, but we deal with it. Build houses, wear coats, carry umbrellas. You adapt, why no? Vrick's tendrils flared in angry crimson. Adapt? To aggressive weather? This is absurd. No advanced species would tolerate such unpredictability. Your claims lack credibility, human. Buddy, Ethan said, leaning forward, if you think I'm making this up, just wait till I tell you about earthquakes and volcanoes. Before Vrick could compose a suitably scathing retort, the ship shuddered violently. The pristine, sterile chamber lights flickered, and an alarm not unlike a warbling bird on helium echoed through the room. Zarak's tendrils snapped to a sharp yellow as he turned to the nearest console. Solar storm detected, Zarak announced. Shields fluctuating. The ship jolted again, sending Ethan's chair skidding a few inches across the floor. He planted his boots and clung to the edge of the table to steady himself. The Xyloxians, on the other hand, stiffened like startled cats. Apologies, Ambassador Vrick hissed, his voice strained as the turbulence continued. This is highly unusual. Such solar activity is rare in this sector. Ethan, still gripping the table but otherwise unfazed, chuckled. This feels like a mild thunderstorm back home. Vrick turned to him, his tendrils now a perplexed mauve. You find this amusing? Well, yeah, Ethan said with a shrug. I mean, I grew up in Kansas. Tornado Alley? A little jostling like this? Kind of nostalgic, actually. The council collectively stared at him, their expressions, if you could call them that, ranging from disbelief to outright horror. You grew up in an area prone to violent atmospheric phenomena, Zarak asked. Sure did, Ethan replied. Tornadoes every spring. Summer's so hot the asphalt melts. Winter's cold enough to freeze your toes off. You get used to it. Used to it, Vrick's voice rose an octave. This is madness. Your species willingly inhabits such a hostile environment. Hey, it's not all bad, Ethan said, grinning. We've got great sunsets. The solar storm subsided as quickly as it had appeared, but the tension in the room remained. Vrick and Zarak exchanged murmurs in their native tongue, their glowing tendrils flickering in rapid, agitated patterns. Finally, Vrick turned back to Ethan. Human, he said, his tone measured but suspicious. We must verify your claims. If your species truly endures such chaos, it is imperative we understand how. For the sake of science. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? Field trip to Earth? I'd be happy to show you around. Unnecessary, Vrick said sharply. We will simulate these conditions here, aboard the vessel, to validate your assertions. Xyloxian's tendrils glowed with faint amusement. It will be enlightening, I am sure. Ethan leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. Suit yourselves. Just don't say I didn't warn you. As the council members began preparing their simulation, Ethan couldn't help but smirk. They had no idea what they were signing up for. Ethan stood in the center of the Xyloxian research lab, a sprawling, dome-shaped chamber buzzing with activity. Xyloxian scientists floated around him, their translucent forms pulsating with light as they adjusted strange, jellyfish-like devices and murmured in their musical language. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something Ethan could only describe as wet circuit boards. At the far end of the room, High Chancellor Vrick observed from an elevated platform, his tendrils glowing faint red in what Ethan had come to recognize as barely restrained skepticism. Xylox hovered nearby, his glow flickering between yellow and green, the Xyloxian equivalent of curiosity. Are you ready? Human Vrick called down, his voice amplified by some unseen mechanism. Born ready, Ethan said, giving him a two-finger salute. He ditched his khakis for a pair of jeans and a hoodie, figuring he might as well be comfortable if he was about to entertain an audience of intergalactic jellybean overlords. The scientists activated the simulation. A low hum filled the chamber as the walls shimmered and transformed, projecting a perfect replica of a grassy field under a gray, overcast sky. The temperature dropped slightly, a cool breeze ruffling Ethan's hair. Initializing atmospheric phenomenon rain, one of the scientists announced. A moment later, the first drops fell. They hit the simulated grass with soft, uneven plinks, quickly escalating to a steady drizzle. Ethan held out his hand, letting the rain soak his palm. The Xyloxians watched in stunned silence as water droplets rolled off his hood and splashed onto his sneakers. You call this rain? Ethan said, shaking his head with mock disappointment. This is barely a sprinkle. Back home, we'd call this barbecue weather. Explained, Xylox said, his tendrils flickering blue. What is the purpose of remaining exposed to this precipitation? Does it not impair your mobility or cause harm? Ethan chuckled and pulled an umbrella from the small backpack he'd brought along. With a quick flick of his wrist, it popped open, eliciting a collective gasp from the Xyloxians. See this? Ethan said, holding the umbrella aloft. This little guy keeps the rain off you. We've got raincoats too, waterproof boots, all kinds of stuff. Adapt and overcome, right? The Xyloxians murmured among themselves, their tones tinged with what Ethan could only interpret as disbelief. Vrick's tendrils darkened to a deep crimson. But why endure it at all? Vrick demanded. Would it not be more logical to take shelter until the precipitation ceases? Ethan shrugged. Sometimes you don't have a choice. You've got places to be, things to do. Besides, it's just water. The real enemy, he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, is wet socks. Wet socks, Xylox repeated, his glow dimming in confusion. You know, Ethan said, lifting a foot and pointing at his sneakers. When your socks get drenched and then you've got to squish around all day. Truly a fate worse than death. Xylox blinked slowly, his tendrils flickering in what Ethan interpreted as bafflement. Your species willingly endures such discomfort. Not willingly, Ethan said, spinning the umbrella like a baton. It just happens. And you suck it up. Or, if you're smart, you bring an extra pair of socks. Before the Xyloxians could process this revelation, the simulation shifted. The rain stopped abruptly, and the temperature plummeted. Snowflakes began to fall, their intricate patterns catching the light as they blanketed the ground in a layer of white. Initializing atmospheric phenomenon snow, the scientist announced. Ethan grinned and crouched down, scooping up a handful of the simulated snow. He packed it into a ball and lobbed it at Xylox, who flinched as it splattered harmlessly against his translucent form. What is the purpose of this? Xylox asked, his glow oscillating between yellow and green. Snowball fights, Ethan said with a shrug. Classic winter activity. But snow's not all fun and games. You've got to shovel your driveway, salt the sidewalks so they don't ice over. We've got snowplows to clear the roads, but even then, winter can be a real pain. Yet your species engages in recreational activities within this hostile environment, Varric said, his tendrils flaring crimson. Sure, Ethan said, brushing snow off his jeans. Skiing, snowboarding, sledding, you make the most of it. That's kind of our thing. The Xyloxians exchanged murmurs, their glowing forms pulsating with what Ethan could only assume was incredulity. Before they could inquire further, the simulation shifted again. The snow melted away, replaced by dark clouds that rolled in from the edges of the chamber. The air grew heavy, and a low rumble of thunder echoed through the room. Initializing atmospheric phenomenon thunderstorm, the scientist announced. The first flash of lightning lit up the chamber, followed by a crack of thunder that reverberated through the simulated landscape. Several Xyloxians recoiled, their tendrils flaring bright yellow in alarm. Ethan, however, stood calmly in the middle of it all, hands tucked into his hoodie pockets. Now this, he said, grinning up at the storm clouds, this is my jam. You find this enjoyable? Zarak asked, his glow flickering erratically. Storms are awesome, Ethan said. When I was a kid, my dad and I used to chase them. Get in the car and drive right into the thick of it, just to watch the lightning and feel the thunder shake the ground. There's nothing like it. You willingly pursued such phenomena, Varric said, his voice rising in disbelief. Absolutely, Ethan said. Humans are curious by nature. We want to understand things, even if they scare us. Besides, thunderstorms are beautiful in their own way. It's not all doom and gloom. The Xyloxians seemed frozen, their tendrils dimming as they processed this information. Zarak, however, appeared almost intrigued. His glow shifted to a soft green as he studied Ethan. You are a perplexing species, human, Zarak said slowly. Your resilience defies logic. Thanks, Ethan said, tipping an imaginary hat. We try. Before anyone could respond, a loud tone echoed through the chamber, signaling the end of the simulation. The storm dissipated, and the room returned to its sterile white state. Varric descended from his platform, his tendrils glowing with a mix of skepticism and grudging respect. This demonstration has been enlightening, Varric said. However, it is clear that we have only scratched the surface of your species' peculiar resilience. We must test further. What do you mean by further? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. We will simulate more extreme conditions, Varric declared, his tone resolute. To truly understand the limits of human adaptability. Ethan smirked, crossing his arms. Bring it on. I've got plenty more stories to tell. Zarak's glow brightened to a vibrant green as he leaned closer to Ethan. I look forward to witnessing your ingenuity, human. And for the first time, Ethan thought he caught a hint of humor in the alien's tone. The simulation chamber darkened, a faint vibration coursing through the floor as the Xyloxian scientists adjusted their instruments. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, waiting patiently as the air grew warmer and heavier, the faint scent of ozone sharpening around him like the prelude to something big. High Chancellor Varric floated just outside the simulation boundary, his tendrils a deep maroon, an emotion Ethan had learned to interpret as some blend of doubt and annoyance. Zarak, by contrast, lingered closer, his glow a curious green as he occasionally glanced at Ethan. The next phenomenon will replicate the conditions of what you refer to as tornadoes, Varric announced. We understand these events are among the most violent atmospheric disturbances on your planet. Well, you're not wrong, Ethan said, rocking back on his heels. But hey, don't hold back on my account, let's see what you've got. The chamber's projected sky grew darker, ominous clouds swirling above with unnatural speed. A low, guttural roar filled the space as the wind picked up, whipping Ethan's hoodie against his chest. In the distance, a funnel cloud began to form, snaking its way down from the heavens like an angry finger aimed straight at the ground. This simulation will allow us to analyze the human response to such an event, Varric continued, his voice clipped. We cannot fathom why any species would willingly remain in regions prone to these devastations. Ethan smirked and crossed his arms, the wind tugging at his sleeves. Well, for starters, sometimes you don't get a choice. Tornadoes don't exactly call ahead and let you know where they're touching down. But when you do know, you prepare. Storm shelters, basements, tornado drills in schools. It's all about being ready. Tornado drills, Zarak asked, his glow shifting to a brighter green. You practice for these events. Yeah, Ethan said, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the growing roar. We've got drills for all kinds of disasters. Tornadoes, earthquakes, fires. Heck, some places even do active shooter drills now, though I'd prefer not to get into that whole mess. Vrick's tendrils flared crimson. Your species dedicates resources to the likelihood of survival, yet you do not simply evacuate such regions permanently. Ethan shrugged. You'd think that, right? But the thing about humans is, we're stubborn. Tornado Alley might get its fair share of twisters, but it's also got good farmland, strong communities, and some of the best sunsets you'll ever see. We stick around because it's home. As the simulated tornado touched down, the chamber shook with artificial thunder, the funnel cloud carving a path across the digital landscape. The Xyloxians watched in horrified fascination as Ethan stood his ground, seemingly unaffected by the chaos around him. And then there are the storm chasers, Ethan added casually, glancing over at Xylox. People who don't just wait for tornadoes, they go looking for them. Follow the storms in their trucks, get as close as they can to study them, or just for the thrill of it. Xylox's tendrils froze mid-pulse. You are saying humans actively pursue these disasters? For enjoyment. Oh yeah, Ethan said with a grin. It's practically a hobby for some folks. They'll strap GoPros to their dashboards and live stream the whole thing. It's equal parts science and adrenaline junkie behavior. You seek out danger for fun. Xylox's tone was incredulous, his glow dimming slightly as if the very concept drained him. Sometimes, yeah, Ethan replied. It's kind of our thing. Vrick's tendrils coiled tightly, his maroon glow deepening. This behavior is illogical, reckless. No advanced species would willingly expose themselves to such hazards. You're probably right, Ethan said, scratching the back of his neck. But hey, we're human. Logic's not always our strong suit. Xylox tilted his head, his glow flickering as he considered Ethan's words. And yet your species survives. You rebuild. Exactly, Ethan said, his voice softening slightly. That's the thing about us. We don't just survive, we bounce back. I remember this one time back in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit the U.S. Gulf Coast. It was one of the worst storms we'd ever seen. Whole neighborhoods wiped out, people stranded on rooftops. The works. But you know what happened after? Xylox leaned closer, his glow steady. What? We rebuilt, Ethan said simply. People came together, neighbors, strangers, volunteers from all over the country. There were food drives, fundraisers, folks opening their homes to those who'd lost everything. It wasn't easy, and it sure as hell wasn't quick, but piece by piece we put things back together. Vrick's tendrils loosened slightly, the deep maroon light fading to a more neutral purple. This cooperative spirit, it is integral to your survival. Absolutely, Ethan said. When the going gets tough, humans band together. Sure, we've got our differences, plenty of them, but when disaster strikes, a lot of that stuff gets set aside. We help each other because we have to. It's how we've made it this far. The tornado simulation began to wind down, the swirling funnel cloud dissipating into the ether. The chamber grew still again, the only sound the faint hum of the simulation machinery resetting itself. You speak of resilience, Vrick said, his tone measured. Yet resilience alone does not explain your species' persistence. You willingly endure conditions that would drive lesser beings to extinction. That's because we adapt, Ethan said, gesturing around the chamber. Take heat waves, for example. When the temperature climbs, we've got air conditioning to keep cool, hydration to stay healthy, and safety protocols to make sure folks don't overexert themselves. And when the power goes out, which, believe me, happens all the time, we get creative. Community cooling centers, battery-powered fans, even good old-fashioned shade trees. The Xyloxians exchanged glances, their tendrils flickering with muted colors. Xylox's glow shifted back to green as he turned to Ethan. You find solutions where others might see only obstacles, Xylox said thoughtfully. It is admirable. Thanks, Ethan said, flashing him a grin. But it's not just about finding solutions, it's about finding them together. That's what makes us human. The simulation ended with a final hum, the room returning to its sterile, brightly lit state. The Xyloxians hovered silently, their tendrils pulsating with soft light as they processed what they had witnessed. You have given us much to consider, human, Vrick said finally, his tone less sharp than before. Your species' capacity for adaptation is remarkable, if baffling. I'll take that as a compliment, Ethan said, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. So what's next? Hurricane simulations? Earthquakes? Locust plagues? Xyrox's glow brightened as he followed Ethan toward the exit. Perhaps we shall begin with simpler phenomena. Your capacity for chaos is overwhelming. Ethan laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. Welcome to Earth, my friend. Welcome to Earth. The room fell to an eerie silence, broken only by the faint hum of the Xyloxian simulation machinery resetting itself. Ethan stood in the center of the chamber, rolling his shoulders and glancing around at the sea of glowing tendrils observing him with a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and from Vricht, what he could only describe as grudging respect. He dusted off his jeans, not that the simulations left any real mess, and waited for the proclamation he knew was coming. We will now escalate the conditions further, Vricht announced, his voice as unyielding as ever. You claim your species endures what you call typhoons and blizzards. These shall be replicated next. Prepare yourself. Ethan cracked a grin, pulling a knit beanie from his backpack and tugging it over his head. Oh, I'm ready. Let's go. The simulation chamber shimmered again, the holographic display dissolving into a vast, open ocean under a darkening sky. The temperature climbed, the humidity wrapping around Ethan like a wet blanket. He could already hear the low rumble of distant thunder as the Xyloxians activated the typhoon scenario. The waves began to crest higher, their simulated spray almost tangible as they slapped against the unseen boundaries of the room. Typhoon simulation initiating, one of the scientists announced. The wind began to pick up, tearing at Ethan's hoodie, and he braced himself as the storm intensified. Vricht's tendrils flared a faint red as he watched from the observation platform. Explain, human. How does your species survive such violent aquatic phenomena? Well, Ethan shouted over the rising wind, we've learned to see them coming, for starters. Satellites, radar, weather buoys, we've got a whole system for tracking storms like this so we can warn people in advance. It's not perfect, but it gives us time to prepare. Prepare how? Xyrox asked, his glow steady and green as he hovered closer. The winds didn't seem to affect the Xyloxians, who floated in place as though anchored by unseen forces. Evacuations, boarding up windows, sandbags to prevent flooding, Ethan replied, his voice straining against the howl of the wind. And if you can't leave, you hunker down. Stock up on food and water, secure your home, and ride it out. The storm reached its simulated peak, the wind howling like a banshee as the rain lashed sideways. Ethan had to plant his feet firmly to avoid being knocked over, but he kept his grin intact. Of course, some folks take it a step further, he added. There are always those who throw hurricane parties. Barbecues, drinks, the whole 9 yards. Hurricane. Parties. Xyrox's tendrils pulsed with confusion. Yeah, Ethan said, laughing. It's like, hey, the power's probably going to go out anyway, so why not make the most of it? Humans are weird like that. We find ways to turn even the worst situations into something to laugh about. Xylox tilted his head, his glow dimming slightly as he processed this. Your species responds to danger with celebration. Not every time, Ethan clarified. But sometimes, yeah, it's our way of coping. Humor, community, resilience, it's all tied together. The typhoon simulation finally subsided, the winds dying down and the ocean fading back into the sterile whiteness of the chamber. Ethan adjusted his beanie, giving the Xyloxians a thumbs up. Next. Without missing a beat, the chamber shifted again. The temperature plummeted, the air filling with the soft whisper of falling snow. Within seconds, Ethan was surrounded by a full-blown blizzard, the whiteout conditions nearly obscuring the edges of the room. He could feel the simulated cold biting at his exposed skin, but he pulled his jacket tighter and crouched down to scoop up a handful of snow. This one's easy, Ethan said, standing tall against the howling wind. First rule of surviving a blizzard? Layers. Thermal gear, insulated boots, gloves, hats, you name it. And if you're caught outside, you build a snow shelter. Keeps the wind out and traps your body heat. Xylox floated closer, his glow flickering with what Ethan recognized as fascination. A snow shelter? You construct structures from the frozen precipitation itself. Yup, Ethan said, crouching down and starting to pile up the simulated snow. Igloos, snow caves, whatever works. It's not permanent, but it can save your life in a pinch. The Xyloxians watched in stunned silence as Ethan worked quickly, shaping the snow into a small makeshift shelter. He ducked inside, grinning at the faint warmth that immediately began to build around him. See? Cozy. Vricht's tendrils flared a deep crimson. Your species willingly inhabits regions where such conditions are common. Not just common, Ethan said, crawling back out of the shelter and brushing snow off his knees. Some of us love it. Skiing, snowboarding, ice fishing winter sports are a huge deal back home. And don't even get me started on snowball fights. Zarak leaned closer, his glow brightening. Explain. Snowball. Fights. Ethan chuckled, packing another snowball and tossing it lightly between his hands. It's exactly what it sounds like. You throw snow at your friends. It's harmless fun unless someone gets a little too ambitious and packs ice in there. Then it's war. Without warning, Ethan lobbed the snowball at Zarak. It passed harmlessly through the alien's translucent form, scattering into harmless flakes. Zarak blinked, his tendrils flickering yellow in what Ethan could only guess was surprise. I believe I lack the necessary solidity for such an activity, Zarak said, his tone tinged with what might have been amusement. Yeah, that's fair, Ethan said, brushing his hands off. But hey, if you're ever visiting Earth in the winter, I'll show you how it's done. As the blizzard simulation wound down, Frick floated forward, his tendrils pulsing a subdued mauve. Human, your species' ability to endure and even thrive in such conditions continues to defy our understanding. These phenomena would be fatal to most life forms, yet you treat them as mere inconveniences or even sources of recreation. That's Earth for you, Ethan said, spreading his arms wide. The planet's basically trying to kill us half the time, but we just roll with it. Zarak tilted his head, his glow shifting to a thoughtful green. Perhaps it is not that Earth is attempting to kill you, but rather that your species has evolved to meet its challenges. Your planet's volatility may have been a crucial factor in your development. Ethan smirked. So you're saying Earth isn't actively trying to murder us, it's just playing hard to get. The Xyloxians exchanged puzzled glances, their tendrils flickering with confusion. Zarak hesitated, then attempted something that might have been a laugh, a strange staccato sound that made Ethan burst out laughing himself. Close enough, Ethan said, clapping Zarak on the back. The alien blinked in surprise but didn't recoil. Vricht observed the exchange in silence, his tendrils dimming slightly. We have concluded our experiment, he said finally. It is clear that humanity possesses an extraordinary capacity for resilience and adaptability. You are far more formidable than we anticipated. Thanks, I think, Ethan said, giving a mock bow. As the Xyloxians powered down the simulation chamber, Zarak floated closer, his glow softening to a warm green. Your species is remarkable, Ethan Grady. I hope you understand the significance of what you have shared with us. Oh, I get it, Ethan said, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. And I can't wait to get back home and tell everyone about the time I impressed a bunch of floating jellyfish with snow shelters and wet sock jokes. Zarak tilted his head again, his glow brightening. I look forward to your return. Perhaps we will meet again. Count on it, Ethan said, giving him a thumbs up. As the Xyloxians escorted him back to the docking bay, Ethan couldn't help but smile. For all their skepticism, they'd come to respect what humanity had to offer. And as he boarded the shuttle that would take him back to Earth, he chuckled to himself, already imagining the look on his neighbors' faces when he tried to explain that their backyard barbecues and snowball fights were considered galactic wonders.